is there any emergency items that we want to add to the agenda? Assuming that there is none, the next thing, item 2, would be the approval of last meeting's minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
I motion.
Thank you, Sharon. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Is that you, Harry?
No, it's
That was
Bob.
me.
Very good. Approval of minutes, say aye.
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 Any nays? Motion carried. Third item of business, if there are any public comments on Zoom, do we have anybody from the public on Zoom that would like to make a comment that's not in our agenda? Now would be the time to do so. If there's things you want to comment about that are on our agenda, please hold off and we will soon be discussing that. Assuming there's nothing else, let's go to item 4 on our agenda, which is the review for special exception to sign regulations in Patton Crossing. And do we have anyone that would like to tee us up on that?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you, Nicole.
So the 1752 North Atherton Street Associates has submitted this development sign approval plan to install a sign at the entrance of the Patton Crossing site located at the intersection of North Atherton Street and Woodcrest Street. The Patton Crossing Master Plan was approved in the fall of 2019, and then we had our first phase land development plan for the Aldi grocery store that was approved in the spring of 2020. So the purpose of this plan is to obtain special exception approval for the proposed sign at the main entrance to the development. The design and coloring will conform to the proposed motif to the future signage in the development as required by the master planning process. The proposed sign exceeds the permitted 25 square feet for a shopping center. It is not one of the specially prohibited signs, and it meets all other criteria, which includes illumination, content, and height for allowable signs. So there's some language in Chapter 140 of the Patton Township Code that covers regulations for signage in the township. And under limited circumstances, applicants may request a special exception to the sign regulations to, quote, allow certain provisions of this chapter to be modified where such modification will encourage excellence in planning and design of signs. So there are 4 different criteria listed that the Planning Commission could discuss and may recommend a special exception, provided that all are met where they are relevant. So it could also be that these 4 things are not explicitly relevant to what we're looking at.
Or 1 might be relevant, and 3 might not be.
Yeah, so it could be relevant, could not be relevant, but all 4 have to be discussed. And if the Planning Commission finds that they're either not relevant or that they are met, it will go then to the zoning hearing board.
Very good. Is it accurate that the biggest issue is probably the size of the sign?
Well, it's not just the size. Yeah, it is bigger than we would permit, but these provisions were put into the sign code many years ago for probably situations of this nature, that where something probably makes sense but doesn't fit our code, then they have an opportunity to come in and ask for a special exception, just as it says. So, Tony, were you going to provide a...
Yes.
Tony, proceed.
Thank you. Tony Fruchtel, I'm with Pantera Engineering. We're the site engineer for the Patton Crossing project. I believe there's a couple members of the ownership group on Zoom here. We have to get to them. We can do that. So this sign has been submitted. It's the entrance sign. It's meant to be the presentation of the site. Our understanding kind of with staff was that this sign doesn't fit into any real category in the sign ordinance. I think that's what Doug was sort of alluding to as far as the requirement for the special exception. So
Hang on a second.
we do believe the sign fits the criteria as requested by the ordinance, and I think as soon as Doug gets it put up there.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's no problem. It'll just be easier to. Yeah, that's
It's
good.
not
right
up there on Zoom yet. Let me get it up on Zoom.
Maybe close that and try to open that again. Might not have
Sharon
updated.
looked really nice,
Yeah,
Pardon?
the sign.
Oh, yeah.
there we go.
There we go, okay. So as far as some unique characteristics of the sign, you can see it's a gray and orange Patton crossing. That's the only lettering on the sign. It's opaque, polycarbonate lettering. It's mounted on a perforated aluminum screen. That's what you're seeing in the back there. So there's a certain amount of allowing the vegetation to kind of come through the sign. And the lighting is in the back of the letters, and it actually kind of reflects off of that screen and backlights the letters. It's kind of, it's not just going to be light splashed onto the lettering, and they don't just light up. It's kind of a unique situation as far as what the sign is comprised of and how it's going to be lit. We think it's unique to the site. It's placed right on top of the wall, as you can see there. There's actually, and if you've seen the site, I think everybody has, there's a second wall that's above it. So this sign isn't going to stick out. It's kind of subdued. It's down below that wall. And it's integrated with the landscaping and the landscape lighting that's going to be in there, the stone on the wall, the brick on the upper wall. It's all part of kind of the theme that's been put together for what this is going to look like. Other parts of the development will probably be using, I say probably, will be using the same components that you see on the wall here and the same vegetation and the sign elements. They'll be reused through the directional signage on the site. This is the first sign out here, so yes, it's kind of precedent setting. We got to start with something. The sign is designed to capture vehicles traveling in both directions. It's kind of got to be big enough to do that. And we felt that using the requirement in the ordinance that's typically set for individual properties or buildings or establishments, we're under that square footage. And since it meets those criteria, it allows the site to kind of have its own identity, its own brand, and that's for the site itself. This is independent of who's in there. People will know when they're getting to Patton Crossing, they're getting to this development. There's a quality to that sign that's going to be expressed through the development, and the developers they spent some time in developing this sign and kind of thinking about how much they're going to actually spend to put this sign in and you know, just the presentation for the site. So we're hoping that the Planning Commission looks at this and considers that this is an asset to this development. It kind of presents the development to everyone. They know where they're coming and kind of what's going to be in there when they get there. So that's all I have. Be happy to answer questions, discuss. We can go from there.
Thank you, Tony. I thought it looked very impressive. Anybody from the Planning Commission want to make any comments? It looks like we'll need a motion to pass it. If not,
I'll motion to pass it.
so Sharon, thank you. We have a motion to pass. Do we have a second?
Could I make a couple of comments? I had my hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please do.
Couple of things. I assume on the entrance road coming in, whenever you develop the other side, you're going to have a corresponding sign on that side also?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think there's a plan for that at this point, but I don't know. I do not know the answer to that. I do understand that if we were to...
Mr. Poole's here.
I don't know that we know the answer to that at this point. I do know that if another sign were to be proposed, we would be back in front of this board making the same request that we are now.
Okay, another
Yeah.
comment. On your background material, why don't you have the same height all the way across it instead of being higher above Patton and then dropping down? I think it'd look better if it was all the same height.
I think that was a design characteristic from our architects that recommended just, it brings a uniqueness to the sign. Yeah, it just adds a little character to it.
So that's intentional.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know, Mr. Poole, is it going to be a mirror image on the corner? Do we know that? So when we pull in, we see Patton Crossing on the right, and there's that opposite corner. Is there a sign that mirrors that of the same?
We've talked about that, but haven't made a decision. You're talking about it right on the opposite side of the wall.
Yeah, like
wall,
the question
yeah.
asked was when you go in, you see it on the right.
Right.
And then you have the same wall, similar, on the other side.
Right.
Is there a sign there too?
Yeah, when the sign is up, if we feel one is adequate, and you really, that's why we haven't decided yet, but if we feel people are missing it from the other side, because the wall's gonna look really nice, it's gonna be a really neat looking wall. So the answer right now is we have it proposed, but we might not do it if we don't have to do it.
Got it. Okay, so Planning Commission, for tonight's purposes, we are looking at the sign, to the right only. Any other questions? Okay, so Sharon, you made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Harry. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay?
Did I hear a nay?
From
Yes,
Bill.
you did.
Two nays.
2 nays.
Okay.
And so we have a majority,
Yeah, I have 5-2.
5 to
In
2
favor.
in favor. Motion passed.
Okay.
Very good.
So
Thank-
we'll have to schedule a zoning hearing board, and we'll be in touch with you about that.
Okay, hey, thanks, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Glad you can make it.
Will you guys just make sure that I don't want to miss any hands on that screen?
Yep.
Did
Will help.
did everyone comment that was asked to comment?
Well, it's too late now, so we've moved on, the applicants have left, so.
All right. Next is item 5, report on pending items.
So there's really not a whole lot to report on the pending items. Everything is kind of as it was. There were no planning or zoning items at the last board meeting, and the sign ordinance update is still in the hands of the solicitor. So we are still in a holding pattern on that.
Okay. Thank you. And item 6, Patton Township Task Force.
So I've had a request from Supervisor Teese, who is co-chair of the Housing Task Force, that we actually play the video during the meeting. So I have called up the merged video, which I don't actually think has been played in any of the meetings yet, and it's 1 minute shorter than if we played each of the 3 individually. So if it's all right, I'm going to go ahead and share the video.
Please do.
Maybe,
What's the matter, Doug?
well, if your sound's off on your,
Is that, yeah, I don't know if that's going to matter. Is that what happened before?
are you muting, Matt? Okay, why don't you start it, we may have to turn your sound on for your computer.
CNET, do you then, for our viewers, are you making this easy for people to watch the video at a later time, in addition to
You
now?
want the speaker, not the microphone, right?
Just cut this and put
Yeah,
it back in
speaker.
videos, just so it saves time on the
Okay, now-
programming, but
Yeah.
live,
Go ahead and play the
Yeah, thank you.
video.
Meaning it?
Patton Township is talking housing. The pandemic has deepened the housing crisis that confronts communities nationwide. Meeting the challenge in Patton Township requires that we seize this moment to work together to make Patton Township a place for all. A vibrant community where we live, work, and play together. A community where businesses can thrive and employees can find housing that is affordable for them. A welcoming community for all families, including single parents and their children. an elder-friendly community where seniors can afford to stay in the community they helped build. It will take all of us to make Patton Township a place for all. Patton Township is closely examining the local housing market to assess housing attainability at various income levels. This past year, an 18-member housing task force has researched housing affordability and attainability. As with most things, housing types and prices are not one size fits all. Housing is a basic human need, and for many of our neighbors, affording adequate housing in the greater State College area has become increasingly difficult. In this video, we will explain what we mean by attainable housing. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, paying for your mortgage or rent should only require 30% of your gross monthly income. The idea behind that percentage is that that is how much a household can pay while still having money left over for other necessities like food, transportation, and healthcare. Finding housing at that price is difficult or not easily attainable. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, a person in the State College area would need to earn $17 an hour to afford a one-bedroom home at the fair market rent price of $885 per month. Or, one would need to work 94 hours a week at minimum wage to afford a one-bedroom home in State College. Let's see what it looks like for someone trying to find rental units in the area. This image from Apartments.com is a search for a two-bedroom or less for under $1,100. There are 8 complexes listed. Rent for a one-bedroom ranges from $890 to $1,100 a month, meaning one would have to earn between $17 and $21 an hour to pay rent while still having money left over for other necessities. One would need to earn $35,400 per year to afford a one-bedroom home in State College. Let's revisit our search and look at for sale homes. Looking at what is available for sale on Zillow, there are 24 homes selling for prices ranging from $83,500 to $2.2 million. A basic way to determine the price of a home you can afford is to multiply your yearly income by 3. This would mean that our home buyer earning between $28,000 to $100,000 per year could only afford 8% of the homes. Finding attainable housing that is affordable and available has become an increasingly difficult task in Patton Township. We hope to reverse this trend. Investing in attainable housing demonstrates a community-wide commitment to making Patton Township a vibrant and sustainable place for all generations. Attainable housing options were a challenge prior to 2020, but since the onset of the pandemic, it has become even more apparent that now is the time to act to make Patton Township a place for all. The pandemic has taught us that adequate housing is a form of health care. The pandemic also highlighted the importance of building community resilience to withstand challenges and foster recovery. Inclusivity further strengthens the community's resilience and keeps it vibrant, sustainable, and attainable for generations. This means that aging residents can stay in the community they helped create. All families, including single-parent families, have support in raising the next generation. And children can live in the community where they grew up when it is time for them to find housing of their own. Pandemic aside, it's important to keep in mind that incremental housing growth is valuable for economic prosperity and stability. Providing attainable housing options near transit is crucial. Employers, and especially small business owners, are better able to gain and retain employees when getting to work is not difficult or expensive. Furthermore, essential workers should be able to live in the communities where they work. Achieving these goals will help make the Patton Township community more cohesive and resilient. Maybe you or someone you care about has struggled with attaining housing. Consider this your call to action. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out in several ways, by going to a public meeting, going online, and by contacting staff. Together, let's make Patton Township a place for all. Stay tuned for our other videos on housing as Patton Township continues the conversation.
So there you go.
Very good. That's our, there isn't another video, that's it, correct?
That's it. That's the merged of all
Yeah.
of the 3 individuals that we
Yeah,
made.
very well
It
done.
was well done.
Yeah.
Good
and,
radio, good voice, too.
Yeah, I've been told by several people that if I want to switch professions, that
Yeah.
that would be my calling, so, keep that in the back of my brain. But just kind of a shout out to CNET, working with Stephanie Yeager and their group was really great, so it was kind of a fun experience, to be honest, so.
Yeah, it's a wonderful video. Do we have any other business?
Oh, the only other thing I want to mention on that, Brian, with the Housing Task Force is that we are wrapping up the final report and that we are planning to present it to the Board of Supervisors on October 27th.
On October 27th. So for anybody watching CNET that wants to get involved, when is their next opportunity to do so?
Well, as mentioned in the video, they can reach out to staff anytime, and I think the first public meeting where anything will be discussed will be that board meeting on Wednesday, October 27th.
Wednesday, October 27th. Very good. Is there anything else before we adjourn? I make a motion to adjourn? Or-
I second.
I can't make that motion, sorry. So
I make the
Sharon
motion to adjourn.
and
Second.
motion carried. All right. Now we're on to our work session, and is CNET staying? or-
Yep, CNET's going to stay.
All right.
Okay. So, Nicole, do we want to have anything you want to tee us up for bicycle parking?
So just kind of the overview at the beginning is kind of the history of how long we've been talking about this and kind of the key points from each of the meetings and the discussion that we've had so far. So at our last meeting on September 13th, Trish Meek from the Center Regional Planning Agency was here with us again to present, and she's also here with us tonight to help us continue talking about it. But there were some specific discussion from the Planning Commission to talking about the incoming residents that have discussed wanting bicycle facilities. There was some discussion about the need for bike infrastructure if we're going to require or ask developers to provide some bike parking and for that access. There was some conversation around bike parking out at Grays Woods Elementary and the cost of developers and like what this would add to a development site. So we did provide some materials in the agenda. There was a couple maps about the existing facilities in the center region and as well as Patton Township. And the Patton Township map is in the Parks and Bicycle Pedestrian Path Plan that the Recreation Advisory Committee put out last fall. So there's some information in there and how to find that plan if anybody wanted to look at it. So Trish is going to present and kind of walk us through some of these other points and kind of address some of those concerns. But I also wanted to kind of mention that after we sort of work through what Trish is going to bring up and mention for us, that we'd like to visit the actual, the table that we created, that's kind of our jumping off point of what each use would potentially require, and ways to maybe incentivize some of that. But we might want to save that for like a later discussion and see where we get with the flow of the conversation for tonight. So I just kind of wanted to mention all those things, that we will talk about those things, but for tonight we should kind of start with our focus being on what Trish is going to talk about and then see if we want to continue or if we want to have that be our main focus for our next meeting.
Very good.
So I believe Trish is, oh, I see you. Okay, so Trish, you're ready. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to say before I turn the floor over to Trish.
Take it away, Trish. No, wait a minute. Go ahead, Rich.
So I reached out to the principal at Grays Woods Elementary, and I was told by Dr. DeWitt that based on the current amount of students that are using bikes there at Grays Woods, she did not feel that there was a need for more bike racks. This was an email that she sent me 2 days after our last meeting, so I just wanted to put that on the record. And, maybe Trish talk to her as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Any other comments from the Planning Commission before Trish takes the show? Go ahead, Trish.
Hey, great, thanks, everybody. Nicole is going to run the presentation for me so that I can watch everyone, make sure I pick up when you have questions. So as Nicole said, we're here to talk about bike parking. So we did a little bit of research based on some of the questions the last time. And so that's what we wanted to start out with, just providing you some information. So Nicole, if you want to go to the next slide. In your agenda packet, we enclosed a copy of our existing bike path map. So some of you may have seen this previously, but every so often, at least twice a year, and when we add new facilities in between, the Center Regional Planning Agency updates this map. So we want people to have a good idea where those facilities are that are formal bike-related facilities so they can get out there and ride, as we say. But just keep in mind that every street is actually usable by a bike with the exception of limited access roadways. So we do have a lot of experienced cyclists in our area that are using those roads, and we have a lot of people from an equity perspective that biking is one of their primary modes of transportation. So I know when I first came here years ago, I didn't own a car for the first 8 years that I worked at the Center Region Council of Government. So biking and walking were really primary to what I did. And so having facilities and places to park bikes are very important to me from that perspective. So the next slide is specifically what is proposed in Patton Township. And the reason that we included this in the agenda packet is I know there was some concern that maybe we should really work more on getting bike infrastructure and facilities in place and then come back to look at bike parking. And one of the concerns from a staff perspective related to that is it could be a missed opportunity. So as new land developments are coming in, as construction activities are occurring, the easiest time to capture bike parking is actually at the time of development. Now, we know that we don't have a plan in place to retroactively get bike parking. There have been some locations where cyclists are using certain commercial establishments or restaurants, and I know that they've reached out to entities and the owners have provided on a voluntary basis additional parking. But the best chance from a municipal level for us to get that infrastructure in place is at the time of the land development plan. So this particular plan was developed in consultation. Your Recreation Advisory Committee actually a number of years ago decided that parks and bike and pedestrian facilities fit very well together because many of these bike facilities or shared use paths are actually linear parks in a sense. And so they took it upon themselves to work on this blueprint for where facilities will be in the future. So when you look at it, there's really a lot of potential there to connect neighborhoods, commercial areas, recreational areas as well. And we just wanted to provide you that basic information. Now, these facilities take time to build. They're more expensive than what you would imagine, especially when we have environmental or right-of-way concerns that we need to address, or if we need to get property to make a particular linkage. So keep that in mind. That's why it takes us time to build the network. But Patton has been doing an exceptional job at just starting to make the connections to the regional network. So I'm glad you brought up about Grace Woods Elementary because I reached out to them and the same message that we currently don't need additional bike racks, but what we wanted to do was just let you see what's out there on the ground right now. So there's 2 racks. One of them is called a grid, and that is the type that the bike is currently parked at. So you can double park this. So just for a little bit of information about racks in general, these racks are used from both sides. So you can see where the bike, I'm actually glad in this photo, which I did receive from a school district employee, it's somewhat of a challenge because we don't want to go on school property and photograph. So we requested this from one of the facilities individuals, took the picture for me. But you can see that this bike is loaded from the side closest to us, but there's another set of parallel bars and the next bike can go right next to it, but it loads off the opposite side of this rack. So you can get quite a few bikes in here, in these grid types of racks, but they're not preferred because it doesn't really provide support to the frame of the bike. And I know somewhere in my photo archives, I have photos of bikes out there, and some of them are laying over or they're on the ground. And usually we can tell people prefer a bike rack type based on if they're using it or not. Are they using the rack? Are they parking it somewhere else? And Rich, just give me one more second to talk about the second rack, and then if you have a comment. The other is called a coat hanger rack. And actually, Center Bike, which is the regional bike advocacy organization, they actually donate racks. They buy racks from Penn State Salvage. So when they're updating their racks, that coat hanger rack type of rack, they sell them to Center Bike, and then Center Bike refurbishes them and donates them to nonprofits or local businesses. So they haven't done any lately, but at one point, Grace Woods Elementary did want additional racks, and that's where that one came from. So does anybody have any questions or comments?
Between the two, what is there much of a difference in preference or cost between the coat hanger rack and what do we define the other type of rack? What style is that?
The other's a grid, and they also call it a schoolyard rack. We as staff would not recommend those just because of that whole support to the bike itself. And as we all know, the cost of bikes has increased significantly in recent years, and people want to protect their investment. And so from a cyclist perspective, if you talk to cyclists, that would be one of the least preferred types. And I do talk about a little later in the presentation, the two that we would recommend be used in future installments.
Trish, it was kind of exciting. So is there a resource for bike racks from the university? Is that something that we can capitalize on?
Well, it's interesting because a number of years ago, Penn State decided that they were going to upgrade some of their racks, or maybe they needed a little bit of work, so a little sanding or patching or painting. And as they bring the newer racks in, those racks ended up at Penn State Salvage. So anybody that's been at that location on campus knows that they sell items they can no longer use to generate revenue. But there was a real opportunity that Center Bike, as an organization, worked with Penn State Salvage, and they asked to be notified every time racks were available. We haven't seen any recently, but they've purchased quite a few racks, painted them, got them ready to go, and then actually delivered, or someone from an organization would come pick them up. And they've been distributed to probably almost 20 locations in the center region.
Nice.
So it's just another way to get racks out there
Yeah.
at no cost.
Excellent opportunity.
And you said the exact same statement that I heard when I asked students that went to that elementary school. They said that there was sufficient space, but they felt that the bikes were not secured and or put in the most seamless way on the bike rack for them. So you kind of said the exact same statement that I heard from students.
And it's interesting, if you have a great bike rack design, people know automatically how they're supposed to park their bike. But with those grid racks, there's some confusion. And sometimes people will park them parallel to the rack, taking up the entire side. And so it really is an educational process, and it's really about getting the right types of racks out there. And that's why, that Pittsburgh, we included that informational piece from the city of Pittsburgh, and we really like that because it had a lot of great information. All of it would not be applicable to Patton Township because of, on-street parking and permit fees and some of those items, but we just thought it had really great bones to it and could be a great educational piece if you do end up adopting the ordinance.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so if we can go back to it, there's one more item that I wanted to mention about this slide. Well, actually two now that I think about it. One thing that I want you to note is that the sidewalk comes along the side of the building and then it just ends. And the racks themselves are just placed in the grass. If you look at the model ordinance that we've prepared, and we saw this repeatedly in all the ordinances that we looked at, there's a very specific definition in what has been recommended, and I'm going to look for it really quick because it's hard to memorize all of this. But for bicycle parking space, which is on page 2 of the draft, it talks about if it is located outside, that it be placed on hard surface and well drained. And that's the other thing, that if we were looking at this plan now and it was coming in, it's already in place, so we don't have the ability to require changes, but we would ask that it be placed on a hard surface. It just makes it, in this case, if it rained quite a bit, you can imagine the mud and some of those issues as well. So access to the rack, having it stationed in a location that's very secure. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention, and Nicole and I talked about this, is that the ordinance that you're considering would not require additional parking at any existing locations. So it wouldn't apply to Grace Woods Elementary unless they came in with a land development plan that they did an expansion that required a land development plan, and then we would evaluate if additional bike parking was needed at the site. So I just wanted to make that point.
So Trish, in other words, current plans would be grandfathered. This is for future plans.
Yeah, if it's on the ground right now, the ordinance does not impact it, only future submissions.
Trish, is there any language in there about lighting?
That's a good question. I think there is something about placement, and we can come back and I can look for this information, and at a future meeting I can highlight where it's at. But I know that it needs to be in a visible location, so that is one of the things that's important. We don't want someone to have to park their bike around the back in an alley in a location that they feel uncomfortable, because that's really important too.
Yeah.
Yeah, generally for all our commercial sites, we require lighting for the whole site, so.
So there'll be, by default, there will likely be lighting anyways, particularly when it's near the building.
Yeah,
and lighting is great
in some
because from a safe-
multifamily residential, we might want to pay a little more attention to lighting. But generally, we require, anywhere that pedestrians are walking in multifamily residential, there has to be lighting also.
Correct.
So if there's no more questions about this, we can move to the next slide, Nicole. So people were asking questions about cost. Now, I'll just qualify, this is extremely difficult to do. And it's because it's a very competitive market out there, and different manufacturers of racks, it's going to be variable based on quality and materials. But I said that I was going to highlight the racks that are preferred and that we would like to see, and one of them is called an inverted U. So really it's just a U upside down. And an inverted U rack parks 2 bikes. So these are 2 inverted U's, so you could park 4 bikes, 1 on each side of that U. So you can imagine if there's a bike up against the side of this rack, it supports the full frame. So it gives that tire and the frame security, and you can easily lock it with what's called a U-lock. So a U-rack, U-lock. There's some of the most secure types of locks out there because you can lock your front wheel and the frame as well. And the thing that also plays into how much these racks cost, or what kind of option are they from a mount option. This is a surface mount, and you can tell that because of the type of flange that's against the concrete, or you can do an in-ground mount where it would actually be embedded in the material that it sits on. So those 2 factors matter, as well as rack finish. So if you go for a stainless steel rack, and it just might be architecturally, that's what you want, it's going to tend to be the most expensive rack. You can get a galvanized rack, a powder-coated rack that matches from a color perspective to your particular parcel or development. Those things all impact the cost. But just a general rough estimate is you could look at from $100 to $300 per rack, which in this case would park 2 bikes. So $50 to $150 per bike parking space for that. Of course, that doesn't include installation, and that doesn't include bulk purchasing agreements or commercial discounts as well. That's just doing some general information, just looking at the overall costs that are available online. Because many times, some of the higher end manufacturers, there's two that really in our country are very popular. They're Darrow racks and Saris racks. And if you want true costs, you need to ask for a quote. So it's based on that individual location and how many you purchase. So the other type of rack that's very popular with cyclists is called a post and ring. Again, can easily see exactly how you're supposed to park your bike. It's very intuitive that it needs to be parked alongside, parallel to the ring. And a post and ring rack will park 2 bikes. Again, cost varies based on surface or in-ground mount option, and the rack finish will also impact the cost as well. When I did some research, these are a little bit more expensive. So $150 to $300 a rack, so $75 to $150 for a bike parking space. I will say that the COG, we purchased 2 of these racks in 2019, and with shipping, we're a tax exempt organization, we paid $133 per rack. And they're very easy to use, they're very attractive, we were able to match the color to the building itself, and they blend right in to most, but if you're riding your bike, you will see it immediately because they're located right outside the front door of COG, the main entrance, and they're undercover, which is another great thing that your bike is protected from the elements when it's there. Those 2 types of racks are generally the ones that you see for short-term parking. So they're out in the open. Now, when you start talking about long-term parking, you can use those interior to a room or a parking structure, the inverted U or the post and ring, but I spoke with Cecily Zhu, who is the alternative transportation planner on campus at Penn State Transportation, and they have purchased these particular racks. They're called the Darrow Duplex. So they provide you maximum capacity in a smaller footprint. So a long-term parking situation, you might look at these as a way to maximize space, and they allow 2-tiered parking. So there's an upper level and a lower level. And if you've ever been, and right now I can't think of it, the parking garage right next to the creamery, these racks are in there. And they've put similar racks in the west parking deck as well and other locations because spaces within a parking garage are at a premium, and these allow you to maximize the amount of spaces. So again, it's the type of material, and the way that you can order these is you can get a Darrow Duplex 6, an 8, a 10, or a 12, and then you can stack them, place them next to each other to get maximum capacity. The type of material matters, and I broke down the cost to be by parking space. So if you got the standard galvanized, it's about $400 per parking space, powder coated $430. So there's a significant cost differential with these racks. But again, it maximizes your floor area. The other type that Cecily said that they have used very successfully, and she likes them, are these, they're called Ultra Space Savers. I believe these ones are, I'm not sure if these are the Darrow or the Saris variety, but it's 1 bike per unit. So you buy units when you buy these, and they can be wall or floor mount. So this one shows the Space Savers being mounted on a wall, but you can also imagine that that pole that's coming down to the floor between the 2 bikes, you can actually place that in the ground, and you can have bikes off of both sides of these as a floor mount. They're a lot more reasonable than the other ones, that at $120 to $175 per bike parking space. So just some options. And when we talk about long-term parking, the idea is that it needs to be a secure location that a person could leave their bike. And these racks will allow you to use U-locks on them, just like the first 2 racks that I talked about. So that just gives you a little bit of idea about bike parking spaces. And then the next option on the next slide is a bike locker. They're very expensive. So if you're in very urban areas, and you want to provide ultimate protection, you would use bike lockers. You know, it's basically one bike per locker. You know, some of the costs could be $2,500 to $4,000 per bike. You know, when you think about how much bikes cost these days, depending on what the situation is, this could be another option. We don't really see bike lockers around the center region. When I first moved to the State College area almost 27 years ago, I remember that there used to be bike lockers outside of some of the dorms. So I'm showing my age there. They have since been removed. I'm not sure what the policy is if individuals are allowed to bring their bikes into those buildings or if they have storage rooms for the dorms at this point. But bike lockers, probably a more urban option. But we still have it located in the ordinance, so if there is a need or desire for those in the future, it is in there. So I just wanted to, I guess I should pause to say, does anybody have any questions about the costs or the types of racks that we reviewed?
No, Trish, it looks like from a developer standpoint, you've kind of already outlined what the rough cost would be. Did you also, so I guess that was just a comment. The finishes, did you, there's no language in there about preferential finishes, correct?
Right. We allow, draft ordinance talks about aesthetics, so the developer could come in and look for what's complementary. So I don't think that we should say it needs to be galvanized or stainless or a certain color, because each individual developer will have a different, you know, scenario.
Yeah.
And I think that the Planning Commission could provide comments on that as part of your review, but ultimately they could make that choice.
Yeah.
So if you want to share the PowerPoint again, Nicole. Now, the handout that we provided you, one of the things that was in there that we thought that was very interesting was they had these layouts. So it actually just can be a great graphic representation. So you can see that on those detail sheets, there is information in the draft that you have to provide a detail. So when you're reviewing a landscape plan, you ask for a detail sheet of how trees will be planted. If you're asking for bike parking or racks, it's great to see exactly what the scenario is for placing those bike racks. So there's no confusion about what the end product will be once they're required. So in this schematic, I just did a really quick snip of that. There's a scenario. So the photo on the far right-hand side is a parking. You can see there's indoor parking. And so it has the words compact. Those are the car parking spaces. And then internal to that structure, it's showing bike parking. So in this case, when you look at the detailed sheet over to it's the photo on the far left-hand side, they're using the inverted U rack, and they're showing 4 racks, which would provide parking for 8 bikes. And what's great about this schematic is it just shows you how those bikes are oriented towards an inverted U and how much space they need. So one of the things you always want to think about, the placement of the rack needs to allow movement around the rack, especially if it's located on a sidewalk. In this case, it's located interior to that building. But when you start thinking about, this plan shows the inverted U's. If you use the other indoor racks, like the ones that Penn State provided us information about that they're using, if you move those against a wall, you start thinking about how you can save that interior space, which is extremely expensive and valuable. So lots of different options, but the ordinance is just asking for that type of indoor protected bike parking for long-term purposes from a recommended perspective. Now, the schematic on the far right also shows what outdoor parking would look like. I don't know if you can, now the pointer is there. Thank you, Nicole. You can see that it's well placed because it's not far from a main entrance to the structure. The doors are to the left of the bike parking. It provides clearance from the wall. So when you look at the center photo, you can see they're using inverted U's for their outdoor parking as well, and how there needs to be a distance from the edge of the wall to those bike racks and then operational room between them. So we really like those schematics because I think until you're actually out there looking at bike parking or parking bikes, you don't really think about how flow works and how they can be placed. So that's why we wanted to call out that information. There's also a little bit more information. What's great about this is this enlarged bike rack detail section, that shows you an in-ground mount. So I couldn't show you that technique with that surface mount from the other photo, but they're actually anchored into the surface itself. What's great here is it shows a hard surface for the bike to be parked on, so the brick pavers. It shows, you know, just how you orient that bike, and it's really important for us to see on detail sheets the actual bike rack itself. And this is, you know, each manufacturer provides these specifications, so when a developer decides they're going to use X rack, it's very easy for them to get the information and provide it to us for review. The other photo on the lower right-hand side, what's interesting about it is this is a way to provide protected parking in an outdoor setting. So this bike parking canopy is an overhang to bikes that are parked adjacent to the structure. So just another way to think about protection for bikes as well. That's probably one of the cheapest ways to protect them. And I should have, now that I'm going back, when we do this presentation in the future to other planning commissions, we'll probably provide a distant shot at call because, you know, we didn't plan to have bike parking under that covered overhang of the building originally. But once we decided we were going to provide parking, it was the perfect location. It's so close to the front door. It provides weather protection to anybody that's parking there. And it's like a brick paver and concrete combo, so we could anchor those racks very easily. Now, Nicole put this information in the agenda, but I just wanted, and we talked about it the last time, but just some things for consideration, what will happen with this ordinance or what we're recommending. So currently, you already have the definition for bike parking space, but you have a recommendation for bike parking space sheltered. And what we would recommend is if you wanted to be consistent with the other ordinances that we reviewed, as well as the model ordinance, the Change Lab model, you would actually move that or change this to be long-term bicycle parking and add, you know, this is fully protected from the weather to the current definition. It just gives a little bit more protection to those bikes and a little bit more clarification for enforcement. Short-term bike parking, bicycle parking is already in the ordinance, as well as bicycle rack and private garage. So they're very well defined. I have a feeling that Greg Garth might have worked on some of those definitions in the past, and he probably used the Change Lab model ordinance for those. But there are a couple definitions that we're proposing be added because we checked, you know, we need to make sure what we're proposing isn't conflicting with your existing ordinance. So we would recommend adding bike parking definitions for bike locker in the event that they're used at some point in the future, and then in-street bicycle parking. And we did talk about this at the last meeting that when we think about it right now, we're not envisioning in-street bike parking. But with some of the master plans, some of the community, some of these larger developments that are coming in, it might be appropriate if we have small downtown or community centers to have in-street bike parking. So we're recommending that you include it in the ordinance. We're still looking at to determine if we need to clarify parking facility because that is used internal to the ordinance. And you'll notice as a use, we have garages, and what that intends are private parking garages that generate revenue. So we know that we're covered there, but parking facility, it could be an accessory use to a structure, and maybe that's where they're providing their parking. So something that we need to consider as we move forward. Now, I'll just review quickly some of the things that we talked about the last time because we do want to leave time for you to just discuss overall the ordinance. But we did decide to structure the ordinance so that it's based on use, and then there's a number of spaces recommended by use. Calculating bike parking. That model ordinance that we originally looked at used individual formulas for short and long-term parking. But after we did a review, and to simplify this, we're recommending that a single formula be used for the total number of spaces, and then use percentages to calculate short and long-term parking spaces. We actually talked to the Ferguson Township planner. They adopted the change lab ordinance in its entirety, and now they're looking at revising it, and this is one of the things that she was also considering. It just really simplifies the process. Now, related to multifamily buildings, there were 2 recommendations or options in the model ordinance. You could do per unit or per bedroom. And from a staff perspective, we're saying, let's look at per bedroom, because we think it would be a more adequate indicator of the number of parking spaces that are needed, because it's really more tied to the actual number of residents. And it's just the trend that we're seeing. We know what the number of bedrooms are per unit. And generally, there's 1 individual for student housing in each of those bedrooms. Also, from a bike parking minimum, we're recommending there be a minimum of 4 bike parking spaces for each use. So even if it's the calculations don't warrant 4, we should require 4. And I'll just say, I did do some reconnaissance since the last meeting, and I took some photos out near the Colonnade, which is a project that was one of the first places that I think we really started to look at bike parking. And, you know, there's these circle racks that are out there, and there's 6 at each of the main buildings. So Wegmans has 6, Target has 6, near Dick's there's 6, over near, I think it's Geisinger Health System, there's 6 there as well. So 6 was the magic number when those were developed, but when I went to look at the sheets, there was an inverted U, so our preferred type, but there was only 1 there. So 2 bike parking spaces at the sheets currently. The only exception that we're recommending from a minimum parking perspective is for the ag use, where there would be no minimum required. And we talked about major renovations the last time, and we've backed off and made some revisions to the ordinance to let the land development plan submission process be the trigger for requiring bike parking. It will be more in line with what Patton Township already does, and it would just be much easier for us to apply the ordinance, less confusion, simplifies the process. And we consulted with Ken on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, when I say this, but land development plans are required if you're expanding a building footprint or you're changing a use that requires an increase of parking of 30% or more. So that would allow us to capture most of those renovations that we were referring to with the model language ordinance. So with that, I'll just open it up for any discussions or questions. And Nicole's controlling the PowerPoint, so we could go back to any of those slides if you have questions about them. We know it's a lot of information, and I know Nicole said I'm back for the 3rd time, but I'm back for 3 more if you need me. I think that it's really important that you really think about the ordinance, talk about the contents, and decide what the best fit is for Patton, because there's no ordinance that works for everyone.
Any questions? Planning Commission? How about Ferguson? What do they have?
Well, they actually adopted the change layout ordinance in its entirety with no revisions. And I think what they've decided is they're going to come back and make some revisions to it to clarify some things. They like the idea of the per bedroom calculator for multifamily. I believe in the draft right now, correct me if I'm wrong, we were, based on what we were seeing from the other ordinances that we looked at, 0.5 bike parking spaces per bedroom. That nets a very large number of spaces. So those are part of the conversations too. Do you feel those numbers are appropriate for Patton Township? We put information out there as a starting point, but Ferguson, their ordinance is the most comprehensive in the region, but they are looking at making some amendments specifically related to multifamily and number of bedrooms, not units, and also moving towards this one calculation per use and then coming up with percentages for long and short term. So it would be in line with some of the things we're recommending.
Other than Ferguson, how about College or anywhere else? The borough?
We looked at
Nicole
those.
did the original research
Yeah.
on it. I don't know, Nicole, if you have recollection of what each of them.
So, just my sense of it without having it in front of me, because it was kind of the very first thing we talked about when we started talking bike parking. Trish is correct that Ferguson Township has the most robust because they did just kind of take the Change Lab Solutions model ordinance. The borough has some zoning districts that have some more specific and particular bike parking language in their downtown area. But other than that, it's a little bit kind of sparse and a little varied for each municipality. So if we're looking to kind of do something a little bit more robust and capture things as land development plans come in, then I think kind of modifying Change Lab to make sense for us is probably a good way to go. And yeah, so does that answer your question?
Yeah. Trish, if we were to adopt something, does that help our letter grade in terms of biking community? And what is our letter grade? Refresh my memory.
I'll give you 2 thumbs up on that. And I didn't tell you to say that or ask that question. Yeah, bike parking is one of the elements that the League of American Bicyclists uses to grade communities. So there's 2 designations. So the center region as a whole, so Patton, Harris, Ferguson, Half Moon, State College, Borough, and College, are a silver level community. So we're at the silver level. Patton Township is a bronze level bicycle friendly business. So you can get a business designation and a community designation. And requiring, it's one of the specific questions that they ask when evaluating you. Do you have bike parking that meets a certain standard? And are you requiring bike parking for these uses? So having something in place that standardizes the process that all developers, so any new development installs some level of bike parking will help. And again, we talked a little bit about this at our staff meeting, and we have a couple avid cyclists on staff, and one of them said that, it really is an equity issue. Some people, they aren't biking by choice, they're biking by need, and having those kind of facilities there is critical for them. So, being able to safely park your bike at Wegmans or another store is really important, because when you're expending the energy to ride there, then you need to ensure that you have a safe place to put your bike. So it is really important to the bike community.
Okay. Any other questions, Planning Commission?
I would just like to thank you for, you've done a lot of work here. It's very thorough. Very well done.
Yeah, and just, I'm excited that Patton will be the first municipality, you're the first ones that we've worked through the process with, and hopefully you can be, setting the bar for everyone else. I know that Nicole, did you want to maybe move through some of the information and just see, because there is so much information in there before you make any type of recommendation, just see, if you've had a chance to look at the ordinance, if there's additional questions you'd like us to answer for you.
Yeah, so if we go back to the definitions part of it, Trish had mentioned that we have several definitions already in place, and they actually do mimic the Change Lab Solutions model. But there's kind of a distinguishable difference with the bike parking space sheltered. That's not something that is included with Change Lab, but we have it. So we're recommending that we remove that definition, but then we need to amend the long-term bicycle parking definition to add and is fully protected from the weather. So that was kind of a discussion point that we wanted to look at with the Planning Commission, how you guys felt about making that change. And then, as she mentioned, there's a couple definitions that we maybe would like to add. They're not so much needed now, but if we're kind of looking at future planning and something that might come along, that would be something that we would already have defined when the time came. So I don't know if we want to start there and get a sense of what anyone thinks of those definitions. And those for the model ordinance that we provided on page 2 are the definitions for that we're recommending, and as we mentioned, a lot of them we already have exactly how they are. So it's just a little bit of modification.
Well, I'm all for your suggestions. So.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. So Nicole, what would, and Doug, what would we need to do to move this forward and,
Like the whole ordinance language?
yeah,
That's what, we're just trying to move through the particulars and make sure everybody's comfortable with all the details that are in it. So, I mean, I guess does everyone feel confident that they've had a chance to review what we're proposing?
I wish Bill were here. He seemed to have some more questions about it.
Well, he's here. He's not on screen at the moment, but he's here.
Oh, there you are.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Just
Sorry, Bill, I didn't see you. There he is.
I'm a little scruffy today, so I was just like, I don't like looking at myself looking like this. So. I don't know. I feel like I need more time to digest it, especially since there's going to be changes that be made. I've pretty much made the statement that I would like to see bike parking and bike paths pushed as one, because I do prefer to see everything to be more complete, having come from, Davis, California, and seeing what, and kind of feeling that the infrastructure is missing. But at the same time, I very much appreciate the research, but I would like some time to read through it. And I'd also, me personally, I'd like to see bike paths somehow tied into this ordinance, as well as one large giant omnibus of biking.
Other commission members, are we feeling that you want to need a little more time on this? Do we want to move forward? Collectively, we kind of need to get a game plan.
I mean, I will say, because this is still just a work session item, we'll at least need to bring it back as an action item before we can officially move away from it. So there'll at least be one more month that we can talk about it. So I can make it an action item for next month, and then if we're ready to move on, we can make the motion, or it can be tabled, and then we'll keep it for another month if that's... Doug, does that make sense to do it that way? Okay.
Yep.
So everybody's okay with that? So then we can have at least one more month, and then if we need more time, then that can also be decided.
Trish raised her hand.
Trish, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say that I did find the section in the ordinance you asked me about, so success for that little pause. So on page 4 of the draft, under bicycle parking standards, it clearly states that all bicycle parking spaces shall be, 1, well-lit if accessible to the public or bicyclists after dark. So it is in there, and it's pretty clearly written. So thanks for making me do my homework during the meeting.
Thank you, Trish. Any other questions from the Planning Commission? Yep, go ahead, Jim.
No question. It's, I'm comfortable with the definitions suggested and the ordinance as suggested and moving forward with it. And in the past, it was put as, we don't want to put the cart before the horse, but at the same time, if you wait on the horse, it's too late for the cart. We need to get something down and in an ordinance so that if a development comes up, it's taken care of. Because if it comes up before the ordinance is done, all we can do is ask, and that's it.
Correct.
I think we need to move forward.
So I think so too.
Yeah. Well, we can't vote on anything tonight anyways, but we can have that as an action item for next month.
Right.
So 2 other things I just want to throw out there if we're looking to expedite this process a little bit is that I mentioned the table that we created is our jumping off point. And Trish and I have already kind of discussed that the ask for the multifamily residential might be a little too high. So we want to revisit that figure specifically, but I would really request that everyone take a look at the table and make sure that you are comfortable with what we are asking to be provided and that you're okay with the percentage split. And I would also say, and Trish and I could definitely talk more about this together as well, kind of making that determination of, if it's a 75-25 split and it comes down to, 8.2 spaces here and then only 1.8 spaces here, we're like making sure that we're clear on our rounding language and how we're officially dividing, whatever those space totals might be. So I would say if we're looking to try to move forward with this, but you guys are happy with most of it, make sure you look at the table and that you're comfortable with that. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you can reach out to us. And Trish and I can also look at incentives. So that can be kind of maybe where we wrap up the conversation as ways to incentivize this. And maybe even look at things like reduced vehicle parking. So that can also kind of go hand in hand with kind of offsetting some of those costs and the ask of the developers. That
So they can ask for like
well,
one or
that's
two
what we
less
can,
spots,
yeah,
so
we
they
can
can
look at
dedicate
language
those.
for that and do some research on that and whatever. Because I cannot remember now off the top of my head if Ferguson Township has anything where they kind of maybe give a couple parking or vehicle parking spaces to get more bicycle parking. So those will kind of be where Trish and I focus for our next meeting. And then, like I said, it'll be an action item. So if we're ready to move on with everything, we can take that route, or it can be tabled if we still have a couple minor things that you guys want to discuss. But I just wanted to make sure everybody's going to be comfortable with what the actual ask is,
Thank you.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I
and
think too,
I do think it's nice to see, if we're asking this of new businesses, that maybe we do lessen some parking. Nicole, can you elaborate a little bit more on this grid? So I'm confused about, in terms of residential development. So what would be the?
So
what-
the table?
Yes.
Okay. So it would basically be, for residential, it would be the multifamily dwellings.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be for single-family homes or anything like that. So it would be for an actual.
Multifamily, so there's
Yeah.
0.5 bedrooms
Well, yeah, 0.5 spaces per
Per
bedroom.
bedroom.
per bedroom.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because the example, actually, Trish, we kept that slide, right? At the end, we just tucked it to the end for the view, that example that we gave. So let me pull that up, because then that'll illustrate the point.
So Trish, I mean, I'm sure the other people in the planning commission are like, I don't know, I can't speak on behalf of anybody else, but I don't know, is 0.5? I have no idea. Where did you get those numbers from?
All of our research of the 7 bicycle-friendly communities and our local ordinances, we kind of tried to marry what made sense for what they were doing with what makes sense here. So
And-
this was Trish and I kind of creating this hybrid approach with our research.
And when you're doing that research, are we looking at climate too? So, I mean, I'm assuming that people in the Northeast tend to bike less than southern climates, or is that not accurate?
Trish, do you have any thoughts on that?
not necessarily true. I think it really has a lot to do with the culture of the community and the infrastructure that's in place.
I would.
So, areas that are designed in a way that's conducive to biking, more people will bike. And, when you think about some of the real powerhouses as far as bicycle-friendly communities, Minneapolis, and it's pretty cold there and a lot of snow, they have a tremendous amount of biking there.
Wow.
So it really is culture, and Chicago as well. I mean, it's a major metropolitan area, but people are biking there in all types of weather. And actually, it's interesting because I can still remember being at a conference years ago, and someone from there's an organization, 880 Cities, and the idea is that we need to make our transportation system available to everybody of every age from 8 to 80. And his comment was, there is no bad weather, just bad clothes. So if you have the right gear, you can bike in pretty much anything. Now, I'm not saying that everyone will do that, but our community, we have a lot of great days to bike. I will say that some people that are avid cyclists will say to you that the winters aren't the problem. It's now the summers here because it's so hot and humid.
Yeah.
And we had quite a few of those this summer. But weather really, it's really about your infrastructure and the culture.
Yeah, I believe that.
Thanks,
And
Trish.
some of the ordinances that we looked at, I'll just say, they required one bike parking space per bedroom. And we thought, well, that probably in our community, that's a little bit more than we should be asking for. And that's what, when Nicole said, we looked at all the ordinances and then we came up with what do we think is a really good recommended hybrid for our community. And we know that people are biking to Penn State, and most of our multifamily structures that we're seeing are student apartment complexes.
Right.
Yeah, so this was a conversation Trish and I did have, is that maybe the 0.5 per bedroom might be a little high across the board. So if that's something, if you know, we can revisit that, maybe 0.25, you know, we will also revisit that number, specifically this number, for next time.
And the other one that Nicole and I talked about, and I think we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting, the theater number, I don't know if you can page down to I think we have an example of that. There it is. So it's based on the number of seats in the theater because it's a nice fixed number. We know what that will be when the plan comes in. But if you applied the ordinance that we put together for our theater, it would require 45 bike parking spaces. So I went out there and looked at it, and currently, right now, there's 6 spaces out there. People do ride to the theater. I mean, it's in a great location, right off of one of Patton Township's newest bike facilities. Yeah. It's easily accessible. You know, people are riding after dark in our community. But the number that we used, when I started to look at that number and thought about it after our last meeting, the communities we're talking about, those theaters are probably in an urban core. So in Boulder and Davis and Fort Collins, these are theaters that are in a downtown. And in Patton, it might make sense for us to definitely back that number off. If you are living in those communities and you're an avid cyclist, you would love nothing more than be able to ride your bike right to the door and park it right outside the theater. And that's probably what that number was based off of. So we can look at some other examples of communities and see if we can come up with something from a recommendation perspective that makes more sense.
Yeah, good. Jim, I agree with you. It would be nice to get something in place, and you know, it's exciting all the changes that the township has made in our bike trails with a lot of effort through the years. So it seems logical to have some sort of written ordinance for bike parking. I guess that's, any other discussion on bike parking?
So we're going to put it as on the list for next.
Yeah, as an action item,
Okay.
so it can actually be voted on.
And that gives Bill a chance to have the rest of the month to read it over and see if he has anything that he wants to change.
Bill, do you have any specific homework questions that you're feeling you need more information on, or anyone else on the Planning Commission? Very good. So yeah, Nicole and Trish, thank you for all your efforts on this. Look forward to being able to perhaps get something in place next month.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yes, thank you.
You're all welcome.
No other items, are we?